The spray hit his cheek like 1,000 tiny needles as he sliced through the churning lake water, the wind slashing across his face while the whole world whispered of rules suddenly being broken. He and his family had been laughing and paddling in perfect harmony for an hour, their kayak cutting through the glassy surface as if they were riding on air, when suddenly the calm gave way to uncontrollable turbulence. The wind picked up without warning, slamming them into unpredictable waves that sent their little vessel careening wildly across the water. Their peaceful morning adventure suddenly transformed into a frantic scramble for survival. With the lake's glassy canvas now transformed into frothy chaos, they chose the desperate escape route, fighting the current against the shore, unaware that their desperate struggle would intersect with someone's carefully laid fishing line, sent taut across the water like a silent trap, waiting for anything to disturb its victim. The line snapped taut across their bow, arcing above the water, catching the kayak's prow and wrapping around the mast like a steel coil, while 3 fishing rods sent synchronized hooks into places they shouldn't have reached. The fishermen froze in perfect horror as their entire morning fishing session disintegrated in a single moment's bad luck, their carefully planned relaxation shattered by the ugly reality of unregulated water sports. One angler lunged forward, his voice shattering the lake's silence as he unleashed a torrent of accusations, calling them geniuses and the smartest people in the world, in a mix of frustration and denial that made everyone watching wonder where the line between accountability and absurd overreaction was drawn. When they finally reached shore, the same woman who had been screaming continued her performance for the neighborhood as she dragged fishing equipment from her truck while muttering curses under her breath, proudly sharing her side of the story with anyone who would listen, while proudly proclaiming they had malicious intent to. The warmth on his co-worker's hand was unmistakable, and the smell hit a second later like a wall. His co-worker froze, looked down at his fingers, then looked at the old man sitting in the mobility scooter, and the old man's face crumbled with shame. Without a word, the co-worker pulled his hand back, muttered something about the restroom, and was gone in 5 quick steps. Now the old man turned to the only person left standing there, and his voice cracked as he asked for help getting upright so he could pick up his dropped keys. The employee, 23 and still in his first month, felt his stomach lock. He could see the stain on the old man's pants, could smell it thick in the afternoon air, and every instinct in his body screamed, "Stay back." He took a half step away and said he was not comfortable touching him. The old man's pleading face twisted into something hard and angry. He jabbed a trembling finger upward and called the kid a psychopath, said he had no soul, that any decent human being would help a man in need. A woman with a stroller walked past and quickened her pace. A teenager across the lot stared at his phone. The old man shouted after them too, his voice breaking, asking if everyone in this town had lost their minds. The employee stood there with his palms sweating and his heart hammering, knowing that if he touched the man and slipped, the store would be liable. Knowing that if he did nothing, he would hear those insults replaying in his head for days. Another passerby finally stopped, a man in a construction vest, and without flinching grabbed the old man under the arms and lifted him steady. The old man leaned on the scooter, breathing hard, and did not say thank you. The employee walked back inside without speaking. He stood in the break room for 10 minutes staring at the wall, unsure whether he had protected himself or shown the world exactly who he was. Was I in the wrong here? The real damage here is not the smell or the liability question. It is the silent agreement everyone in that parking lot made with each other. The weight of his mother's words settled in his chest like stones. She had called with that fragile edge in her voice, the one that meant she was scared but would not say it outright. Your father nearly fell again yesterday. His parents had raised him in that creaking house with the faulty kitchen faucet. But he had built his own home now, 950 square feet of carefully chosen space. The Murphy bed he installed himself. The single bathroom that took 6 months to renovate. The home office where his freelance work paid every bill. When they asked to move in, he did not say no immediately. He sat with it for 3 days. Pictured his father's oxygen tank in the hallway. His mother rearranging his kitchen. The quiet death of his morning coffee ritual. The only thing that kept him grounded. He suggested a senior apartment 2 miles away. Walkable. Safe. He would visit daily. He would help with the deposit. His mother's voice turned cold. We changed your diapers. We paid for your college. And you are sending us away to die with strangers. Family takes care of family, his brother said. You owe them. The peak came during dinner at his sister's house. She stood up and pointed her fork at him. If you do not take them in, you are dead to us. His father stared at the table. His mother would not look at him. For one sickening moment, he believed he was the villain. He did not cave. He told them he loved his parents, that he would help them find somewhere nearby. But his home could not become a care facility. The door stayed open on his terms. Guilt only works when you believe you have done something wrong. He had not. Setting a boundary is not abandonment, it is honesty. If love demands that you burn your life down to prove it, was that ever really love to begin with? Was I in the wrong here? What is striking here is how family guilt often disguises itself as obligation when it is really about convenience. The siblings were not volunteering their own homes, they were volunteering his. That is not a cultural value, that is crowdsourced. The smell of warm dough and melted cheese hit her the second she walked through the door, and for a moment everything felt normal. Her sister had invited the whole family for pizza night, insisting she would pay this time, and the table was crowded with laughing relatives passing slices back and forth. She watched her sister hand over her card at the register with a proud little grin, and she thought it was sweet. On the drive home, her sister started muttering about the bill, about how she might have been $2 short, about how she needed to track her money better. She offered to cover the difference immediately, but her sister waved it off while still talking about it. The repeated worry gnawed at her because money had always been a nerve, something tied to years of watching her parents stress over every grocery receipt. She works more hours than her sister does, putting herself through college on top of it, and she pays for almost every outing without complaint because she genuinely enjoys treating her family. So when her sister finally laughed and said she should have been the one paying tonight, she answered without thinking and said she pays every time and did not understand the joke. Her sister's face dropped, and she said she never realized her sister had been keeping score. The car went silent except for the hum of the highway and the faint radio, playing something neither of them heard. She pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine before explaining that keeping score was the opposite of what she meant, that she had never once tallied what her sister owed. Her sister sat quietly for a long moment, and then admitted she had felt guilty for years about not contributing equally, and that the joke was actually her way of fishing for reassurance. She reached across the console, squeezed her sister's hand, and told her that paying for family was never a debt and never would be. Her sister finally exhaled and said she needed to hear that out loud. Do you think families should talk about money openly, or does bringing it up always end in someone feeling guilty? What makes this story sting is that both sisters were doing the exact same thing, protect. His words tasted like whiskey and regret before they even left his mouth. For weeks Brian had been unraveling, calling at 2 in the morning to say nobody would remember him, asking why everyone wanted to hang out with his best friend instead, spiraling into self-pity that drained every conversation dry. The narrator had held him together through all of it, repeating the same reassurances, absorbing the weight like a sponge nobody thought to wring out. At prom he worked the room, shaking hands, collecting phone numbers, building connections he hoped would survive the summer. Then he glanced across the dance floor and saw Brian standing alone against the wall, shoulders hunched, barely talking to their one mutual friend. He walked over. Brian's eyes were glassy. He wanted to go home, he said, and the jealousy radiating off him was suffocating. The narrator left early with Brian and a few others around 1:30 in the morning, his judgment blurred by hours of cheap champagne. In the car, something snapped. He turned to Brian and told him to stop being pathetic, that friendships required effort, that he was tired of being a therapist every time they spoke. The words landed like a slap and Brian's face went blank in the dark. Brian has not spoken to him since, and the silence is louder than anything either of them ever said. Was the honesty worth losing a 4-year friendship over? There is a particular cruelty in delivering harsh truth to someone already fragile and framing it as helpful. Brian's spiral was not something a drunk wake-up call could fix. It was a pattern that needed patience or professional intervention, not a car ride ambush. The narrator's frustration was valid, but the venue mattered enormously. Drunk prom night confessions do not land as wisdom. They land as abandonment dressed in honesty. What is most revealing is that he still frames this as whether he was the asshole rather than whether his friend is okay. A small but telling detail about whose pain he is actually measuring. His words tasted like the low hum of his gaming headset was the only thread connecting him to anyone at all, carrying her laughter and her pain across state lines in the dead of night. He had learned the hard way that long distance never worked. One by one, those relationships had crumbled under the weight of missed calls and fading texts until he swore he would never try again. But Amy lived just one state away, and they shared something he had not felt in years. Both of them were raw from brutal breakups, and they spent countless nights swapping stories about the people who had torn their hearts apart, finding comfort in shared pain. He started falling for her, and she knew it. They agreed to stay friends, pretending that would be enough to quiet what they both felt. But something changed. Her messages grew shorter, then stopped altogether. The late-night calls became brief check-ins instead of the hours-long conversations they used to share. She pulled away, and every time he tried to close the gap, she stepped further back without explanation. He watched himself become a ghost in her life, someone she used to talk to rather than someone she wanted to talk to. So he made a painful choice. He turned to Kay, a friend he had known even longer than Amy, and felt something new beginning to grow. When Amy found out, she did not fight or accuse. She simply said she needed to disappear from his life because watching him love someone else would destroy her. She walked away wishing him well, and the silence hit harder than any argument. You can meet the right person at the wrong moment and lose them before you ever truly had them. Was I in the wrong here? What stands out is that Amy did not get angry. She got quiet. And quiet rejection hits differently than a fight because there is nothing to push back against. He is left holding all the guilt with no closure, no argument to replay. It raises an uncomfortable question. Are we too quick to assume the other person does not care, when really they are just scared? We treat emotional availability like a switch you flip, not a muscle you. The taste of anger was metallic in his mouth, like biting down on foil. She'd found a dresser on the side of the road and stormed into his room, demanding he go get it. When he said he was fine with what he had, she exploded, calling him ungrateful and accusing him of always acting this way. He tried to explain, but his words only fed the fire. She called his behavior disgusting and told him to leave. He spent the weekend replaying every argument, every time she'd twisted his words. Yesterday, she sat him down and spent 30 minutes listing every mistake he'd ever made. When he finally spoke, telling her she came off as aggressive, she accused him of holding grudges. He realized this wasn't just one fight. It was a pattern that had been shaping his relationships for years. He'd spent years believing he was the problem, that his tendency to shut down made him difficult, that his distance was a flaw. But as he sat there, listening to her rewrite history, he understood that her defensiveness was the real wall between them. The moment he tried to set a boundary, she weaponized his past against him. He walked away knowing he couldn't change her, but he could change how he responded, starting with moving out. Is that love or control? This story reveals a toxic dynamic where one person's emotional volatility becomes the other's reality. The mother's defensiveness, labeling boundary setting as holding grudges, silences the other person's experience. What's telling is how the son internalized this pattern, believing his tendency to withdraw made him the problem. The real issue isn't the dresser or the jokes. It's the power imbalance where one person's feelings always override the other's. Recognizing this pattern is the hardest part because it means questioning the person who raised you. The taste of anger. The crack in her mother's voice was meant to sound like tears, but it landed like a door slamming shut. The word sorry came out 3 times in one breath, each one laced with something that felt nothing like remorse. She had finally done it. She had told them the truth. The comments about her weight, the constant tips, the daily reminders that she wasn't thin enough for marriage. She had asked them to stop. Her diagnosis of PCOS made weight loss a biological battle, not a character flaw. But in her household, biology didn't matter. Marriage did. And marriage required a certain kind of body. Her mother's voice cracked higher with each repetition. We won't say another word, since you've clearly outgrown us. The sarcasm wore a mask of hurt, but the sting was unmistakable. Her father sat silent, nodding along. the patriarchal enforcer who never had to say a word. She has borderline personality disorder, which means rejection cuts deeper than most people can imagine. Every sarcastic apology felt like a fresh wound. She didn't want them to stop caring. She wanted them to understand. But understanding would require admitting that their version of love came with conditions. The conditions were her body, her weight, her marriageability. She was trying to break free from a system they had spent their whole lives building. The conflict wasn't between her and them anymore. It was between who she was becoming and everything they had taught her to be. They weren't sorry that they hurt her. They were sorry she noticed. In the end, she apologized for having feelings, and the silence on the other end confirmed what she already knew. So tell me, was she really the bad guy for wanting love without conditions? The cruelest form of emotional manipulation is the sarcastic apology. It forces the victim to either accept a hollow gesture or look like the unforgiving one. What makes this story particularly heartbreaking is the double bind. She needs her parents' support to navigate both POS and BPD, but that support comes at